I live in western Pennsylvania by the Ohio border. I'm a member of the International Ghost Hunters Society, and I'm writing a book about my experiences and the true life experiences of others concerning the spirit world. I've been experimenting with ghosts and music now for about 4 years. I play 19th century folk music and Civil War tunes on the mountain dulcimer. The results are fantastic. One of my first contacts with the paranormal was with Esther Hale in the Spruceville area of Beaver Creek State Park. According to Gary Winterburn, author of Scenes of Little Beaver Creek, the ghost of Esther Hale appears mostly on September 29th, St. Michaelmas Eve. I'm sure she's been sighted on many other occasions, but September 29th really seems to have a special significance. On September 29th, 1996, I travelled to the Sprucevale location with my daughter and her friend. It was nearly dark. I parked the car and waited to see if the ghost that locals had been seeing for over 100 years would appear. I checked the time when we parked up. It was 7:50 p.m. We waited for about 20 minutes, not seeing anything. Then I asked my daughter, who was in the back seat, to pass my dulcimer to me. That was the first time I ever played in the dark. Well, I stumbled through a few old songs, then decided to play Amazing Grace. Just as I started into the second verse, the girl said to me at the same time, "Oh my God, there she is." I looked up to see a misty figure moving by the side of the mill. As I played, she seemed to move with the music. Soon, she was right in the middle of the road. When I played fast, she moved fast. When I played slow, she moved slow. When cars would appear from either side of the hill, she would vanish, completely out of sight. When it went dark again, she reappeared to dance for us. This was unquestionably the most awesome sight I'd ever witnessed. Since I read that she was there to meet her husband-to-be who never returned from the Civil War, I played all the Civil War era tunes I knew. The last song was The Vacant Chair. As I played and sang, "We shall meet, but I shall miss him. There will be one vacant chair." She stopped whirling in the road and started walking directly towards us. The electricity in the air was unbelievable. My hair was standing up on my arms and the back of my neck. As she came closer, we could see the features of her face. Her hair was in a roll around the back of her head. She was a very small, petite woman. As she approached us, my daughter became very uneasy. "Let's go, Mum, now, please." At that moment, I turned the headlights on, and there was absolutely nobody there. The ghost of Esther Hale had completely vanished. It was 9:10 p.m, and we had interacted with the ghost of Esther Hale for nearly an hour. I've not been able to find out if Esther Hale died in the 1830s or the 1860s. The stories around here seem to differ somewhat, but she really seemed to like the music that I was playing for her. Thanks for listening to the story. I'm 41 years old now, but when I was about 3 years old, me, my mother, my stepfather and my sister all moved into a rental house in a nice neighbourhood in our town. The house had 3 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms, and it was way bigger than our previous home. However, even though I finally had my own bedroom, me and my sister continued to share a bedroom and share a bed. I think we both felt a bit uncomfortable in the new home, and my mum felt like we'd both shared a bed for that long, we just felt comfortable that way, and eventually we'd grow out of it. There were 3 significant incidents that happened while we lived in that house, the third of which will haunt me forever. The first incident occurred when I was about 4 years old. We had a small sliding door to the attic. It was situated in the bathroom, just above the bathroom door. I was sitting on the toilet doing my business when I heard what sounded like 3 faint knocks on the attic door. This in itself wasn't terrifying, but it certainly grabbed my attention. However, then there were 3 much louder, more audible knocks. By this point, I was very scared indeed. I quickly wrapped up my business and made my way towards the bathroom door. Just as I reached the bathroom door, the sliding door to the attic slid open on its own. I didn't hang around for long enough to look up into that dark void. When I told my mum what had happened, she played it down and said that it was probably just raccoons. But I know that those knocks were intentional. The second incident occurred when I was playing outside on the patio. I heard someone whisper my name, but I couldn't really tell where it was coming from. I was a bit creeped out, but I tried my best to ignore it and carried on playing my game. After a few minutes, I heard it call my name again. Only this time it was louder, and it sounded exactly like my sister. The problem was, I knew my sister wasn't home. This time, I knew exactly where the voice was coming from. We had an old wooden shed situated at the other end of the patio. That is where the voice was coming from. The door to the shed was cracked open just slightly, so I cautiously and apprehensively slowly approached the shed and opened the door. Part of me was thinking that maybe my sister had come home without me realising, and she was just playing a game with me. But as I opened that door, I realised that there was absolutely nobody in there. It was just full of old gardening tools. Yet, I know exactly what I heard. I closed the shed door and ran back into the house. The final incident occurred when I was around 5 or 6 years old, and my sister would have been around 9 or 10. The way our bedroom was set up was, our bed was situated in the far corner against the wall. My sister slept close to the inside of the wall, and I slept on the outside. We had an oscillating fan against the far wall that was aimed directly at our feet. Just outside our bedroom door was the hallway with the bathroom opposite. One night, my sister woke up in the middle of the night, desperate to use the bathroom. For some reason, I woke up too, and had the urge to look down towards my feet. Standing there, at the foot of the bed, closest to my side, was a dark silhouette with a profile very similar to that of my sister. I couldn't make out any distinct facial features, because it was just a dark, dark void of a silhouette, and it was standing perfectly still, staring at me. I could see the fan rotating behind her, but not a hair on her head moved out of place. I quietly called my sister's name and got no response. Then I called her name for a second time. Again, no response and no movement. When I looked out into the hallway, I could see that the bathroom door was closed, but I could tell that the bathroom light was on through the small crack underneath the door. When I looked back towards that figure It now seemed to be inching, slowly, closer to me. She was moving slowly, but she wasn't actually moving. It was like she was slowly gliding across the floor, closer and closer to me. I was frozen stiff, absolutely petrified with fear. As soon as the bathroom door opened, the figure disappeared and my sister walked into our bedroom. I remember I was absolutely terrified and I refused to ever be alone in that bedroom again. We moved out soon after this, and I've never experienced anything of a paranormal nature ever since. There was something very wrong with that house. I lived in a house in Bedford, Ohio, that was built by my great-great-grandfather. When he passed away, the house was passed down through generations. Eventually, the house was passed down to my father, and he lived there for many years. I was only 2 at the time when this particular incident occurred. I don't remember this, but my whole family says that I used to sit up in my crib and talk to someone or something, and whenever anybody would walk into the room, I'd just stop. Another incident was when I was about 6 or 7 years old. I believed my grandfather was walking around upstairs because I could hear heavy footsteps walking around in the attic. The floorboards were creaking under the pressure, as if somebody was walking around up there. My house was cornered by woods on either side. Me and my brother were in the swimming pool when we could both hear something over by the trees. We looked over and saw the dark silhouette of a man over by an old dead tree. Figure looked very, very tall and thin, with long arms and long fingers, and wearing what looked to be a top hat. We could also see that he had very dark, sunken eyes. My brother told me to get out and literally threw me out of the pool and took me over to the porch leading into the house. When we looked back, that figure was gone. We bolted into the house and locked the doors. Another experience was when my brother and his girlfriend were sitting in the living room late one night. They were about to move out in 2 days' time. His girlfriend was sleeping on the couch when my brother noticed something out of the corner of his eye. He turned to see a sphere-shaped orb moving slowly across from the bathroom to the kitchen. He said the orb had a smoke-like consistency. It stopped for a brief moment and then continued onto the kitchen. Another time, his girlfriend was alone in the house one night. It was like 2:30 in the morning. She was talking on the phone when she could hear pounding on the doors upstairs. Now, the door leading to upstairs was locked, and nobody was up there. She stopped speaking on the phone for a brief moment and listened. Banging now gradually seemed to be making its way down the stairs. She hung up the phone and made her way towards the front door. Suddenly, there was pounding on the door separating her from the stairs. It was so loud and she was so frightened, she ran out of the house. As she was getting into her car, she said that she could still hear that pounding coming from inside the house. The last encounter was experienced by my mother. She was home by herself, going down the stairs into the laundry room. When she was walking down the stairs, someone or something threw a Christmas wreath and it hit her on the back. She turned around expecting somebody to be there, but there was no one. She had only just put all the Christmas decorations back in the attic. Eventually, we sold the house and moved out. I haven't lived there now for about 10 years, but I do wonder if the ghosts of that house still bother the current owners. I would love to live there again. Those were some strange times. When I was a child, maybe 6 or 7 years old, I experienced some kind of entity when I was with my best friend. Based on what I now know as an adult, I'm fairly confident that what I experienced was in fact a demon. My very first experience with this entity was when I went to my friend's house for a playdate. The light in her bedroom was off, but the light in the closet was on. So when I walked into her bedroom, the closet was the first place I checked. And there she was, sitting on the ground in the closet, talking as if she was playing with another child. I asked her what she was playing, to which she responded that she wasn't playing at all, but rather talking to her friend in the closet. I remember she had a Barbie poster in that closet, so I asked her if she was pretending to talk to Barbie. She got kind of annoyed with me, and again said no. Then she abruptly stood up, walked out of the closet, turned around to me, and said, "What are you doing in the closet?" It was as if she had no recollection whatsoever of what had just happened. This was extremely strange behaviour for her, because she was generally a really sweet child, and way more thoughtful and caring than the average kid of our age. She was never one to lie or try to hurt someone else's feelings. The next time we encountered this entity was when we were playing in her playroom. There was a bunk bed in there, and we would build a fort by hanging a blanket around the bottom bunk. We would also turn the lights off to create an atmosphere for our game of dolls, or whatever we were playing at the time. The door of the playroom was closed but not locked. We were sitting there playing, and I saw the dark silhouette of a woman move between the crack of the hung blankets behind my friend. I thought that her mum had come into the room to see what we were up to. I told my friend, and she suddenly went very still and had a fearful expression on her face. She asked me to turn on the light. So I got up and turned on the light, expecting her mum to be in the room. But she wasn't. The room was empty. As a child, I thought nothing of it. I flicked on the light as my friend watched from our fort. The very second I turned on the light, the doorknob next to me started turning, completely in one direction, then the other. It was turning quickly and loudly, as if somebody was playing with it. Again, the door wasn't locked, so if anybody was trying to enter the room, they could have. I remember waiting there for a minute, watching this door handle in confusion, wondering why her mum wasn't entering the room. Maybe she was doing this to let us know that she was coming in instead of knocking. But I still found this strange, so while the doorknob was turning, I grabbed it and opened the door. Of course, I'm sure you can gather, there was absolutely nobody on the other side of that door. I went to the closet in the hallway near that room to see if maybe one of my friend's siblings had hidden in there. But, of course, that closet was empty too. When I was looking in that closet, my friend ran out of the playroom and down the L-shaped hallway to her mum's bedroom. I went in after her, listening to her explain to her mum exactly what had just happened. I confirmed that the story was true, and she wasn't pretending. Her mum humoured us, but I could tell deep down that she just thought that we were kids pretending to be scared. We also checked, and neither of my friend's siblings were home that day. This was the last experience that I vividly remember, but it's not the end of the story. A couple of years after this happened, my family moved away and I lost touch with my friend. We never really spoke about that incident, half because she didn't want to, and half because other things took precedence in our lives. Fast forward approximately 17 years later, and my friend has moved to the town that I live in. He reached out to me, and we agreed to meet up to have a catch-up. I am pretty direct and straight to the point, so I didn't waste much time in talking to her about what had happened. Through the years, I realised more and more how wild this experience was, and talked to my friends and family about it. I also searched on Google for things like doorknob turning on its own, and never found a logical explanation. Anyway, my friend answered my question with a simple, "Yes, of course I remember that." He said, "I always wanted to talk about it because there were things that you were never aware of, and I wasn't sure if you'd be too scared to hear it." I insisted I'd be fine to talk about it, but what she told me was absolutely spine-chilling. She told me that later that night she was woken up by some kind of growling noise. She told me she looked over to where I was sleeping and saw a shadowy woman with deep red eyes and demonic-looking facial features. She said that this figure was standing next to me, staring at me while I slept. But once this entity had noticed that my friend had woken up, she looked her dead in the eye, put her finger up to her lips, and made a shh sound. She said she never screamed or ran to get her parents because she was absolutely frozen stiff with fear. The woman, ghost, demon, whatever she was, then faded as she turned and walked away. My friend said she then pulled the blanket over her head and tried her best to fall back to sleep. My friend said she saw the entity a few more times, but it was only ever when I stayed over, and she was always too afraid to mention it to me. I moved away soon after, and she never saw that woman again. When her brother moved out to college, she moved into his bedroom in the basement. When she was clearing out his things in the closet, she discovered an Ouija board, so thought that this must have been the cause of the activity. I think that she was worried that this lady had attached to me and followed me out of state, but I never had another experience like that ever again. I would sometimes wake up in the middle of the night, feeling like I was being touched, or maybe I'd see a shadow out of the corner of my eye. But I know it wasn't sleep paralysis, because I was still fully awake and could move whenever I experienced something like this. However, it's been a long time now since I experienced anything paranormal. So, I really hope that's the end of it all. Thanks for listening to my story. When I was about 12 years old, I saw something that will haunt me for the rest of my life. I was in my bed at about 10:30 p.m. I remember I wasn't very tired. I was feeling restless and was wide awake. On the left side of my bed was my bedroom door, which was always wide open. I was looking outside my bedroom door, just staring into space, hoping that maybe at some point soon I'd fall asleep. But I wasn't tired at all. I was restless. My parents were in their bedroom not far away from me, and I could faintly hear the sound of their TV coming from down the hallway. At the time, My mum had placed a crystal lamp in the hallway just outside my bedroom door. She turned it on every night to make sure that the area just outside my bedroom door and my bedroom itself wasn't in total darkness. It was just bright enough for me to be able to see, but dark enough that I could fall asleep. As I was laying on my side, looking out my bedroom door, I got that urge to turn over and try to get comfortable on my other side. Maybe the dim light was keeping me awake. However, as I turned over to face the other side of the room, I saw something that absolutely chilled me to my core. It's an image that's permanently ingrained in my memory, and I'll never forget it, no matter how hard I try. As clear as day, what I saw appeared to be a child with white, pasty skin, like that of a corpse. He had short, straight black hair, and his mouth was open so wide you could probably fit an entire apple inside. But the worst part, the thing that I'll never forget, were his eyes, or lack thereof. There were no eyes at all, just pitch black voids where his eyes should have been. Bizarrely, I still knew that this boy with no eyes was staring directly at me. It was as real as when my mum was in my bedroom saying goodnight to me earlier on. I froze for probably 5 seconds, trying my hardest to process what I was seeing. I felt its presence, and there was an instant connection. He didn't make any sound, and he didn't move at all. He just stood there, with his mouth agape, staring straight into my soul. Very soon, the confusion and shock dissipated, replaced by a feeling of absolute terror. I have never jumped out of bed faster than I did that night. I ran straight into my parents' bedroom, crying and shaking intensely out of pure fear. I'm now 26 years old, and I still remember what I saw that night, as if it was yesterday. The feeling of its presence, it still sends a shiver down my spine. I've never been able to explain it. I've never been one to watch horror movies, and I've never been interested in or curious about the paranormal. I've never had any experiences with ghosts prior to this. So what I saw that night was absolutely horrifying to me. Have you ever encountered an apparition or anything similar to this? Do you know if there's a deeper meaning to this type of phenomena? I can honestly say I've never been more terrified in my entire life. I couldn't think of a better place to post this story than Reddit. Last night, while I was watching TV in my bedroom, my mum randomly shouted, "What did you say, son?" I explained to her that I hadn't said a thing. Then again, a few minutes later, she said, "Josh, did you just call me?" Again, I hadn't said anything. I didn't really think too much of it until this morning. My mum had something playing on the TV in her bedroom, and I could hear it from my room. It sounded like Jerry Springer, so I yelled, "Hey, Mum, what are they talking about on TV?" I got a clear response.
"If you want to hear it, come in here and watch it."
The show really caught my attention. It was a funny episode. I kept listening, and then said while laughing, "Oh my God, what did he just say?" This time, my mum sounded really irritated, and shouted,
"I'm trying to watch this. If you want to hear it, come in here and watch it."
I got out of bed, and slowly made my way over to her bedroom to watch it. I started talking to my mum as I entered the room, only to notice that she was fast asleep and snoring. Clearly, she'd been asleep for a while, so I woke her up. She said, "Bloody hell, Josh, why did you wake me up? What time is it?" After I told her what I heard, she told me that she hadn't been watching TV, and the TV wasn't even on when she fell asleep, and she'd been asleep for a while. She then proceeded to tell me that the previous night she kept hearing me calling her name, and that's why she was asking me what I wanted. The voice I heard clearly sounded exactly like my mum, and she said the voice that she was hearing was undoubtedly mine. To say I'm a little bit freaked out would be the understatement of the century. I really don't know what to make of this. Do you have any idea what's going on? I don't know how many people really believe in ghosts or the paranormal. I would never say I'm some kind of professional psychic or medium. I'm definitely not. I just know I've always been able to see things other people couldn't see, hear things other people couldn't hear, knew things other people didn't know. Pretty much my whole life. I felt like a freak and a weirdo for a really long time, until I realised that this is just part of my life. It's not going away, and I need to accept it. I sought some guidance from psychic mediums and the paranormal community, and it really helped. Just a bit of backstory, but it is important. Now, on with the story. One night, a couple of years ago, I was laying in bed trying to fall asleep. Our house had a long hallway upstairs. My room was at one end of the hallway, and my sister's room was at the other end of the hallway, next to my mum's bedroom. My sister had a friend staying overnight who was dealing with an abusive boyfriend at the time. They were drinking and talking about what she should do about the situation. This will be important later. Have you ever had the feeling that somebody is watching you? Or that feeling when you just know that somebody has stepped into your space? You don't have to look, you just know. Well, that's what I felt. I looked up to see a girl with just her head poking into my room through my slightly open door. I just stared for a second in shock. I didn't recognise this girl at all. She looked a bit shorter than me, probably in her 20s, with long, dark, scruffy hair. I was wondering who she was and what she wanted. At first, she had a very serious, stoic expression on her face, but then she started to smile. But I don't mean a friendly smile. This was sinister. Slowly, her eyes widened, huge and black, and her jaw seemed to unhinge into this unnaturally wide, sick, evil smile. My stomach dropped as I just stared at her for what seemed like a lifetime, frozen in fear. The evil smile soon dissipated. Her expression was once again without any emotion. The girl turned around and skipped down the hallway towards my sister's room. My initial thought was that this entity, spirit, demon, whatever it was attached to my sister's friend. Depression and abuse, all those type of terrible situations can really attract negative energies. So this just made sense to me. I'd like to bring the story forward to last night. It's been a few years, and my parents have since gotten divorced, which is a crazy story in itself. Let's just say I realised that my dad wasn't the only narcissist in our family. My mum absolutely was too. They were a toxic couple to say the least, and I'm now in a situation where I have to live with my mum. It's fine for now, It's free. I'm grateful and I'll deal with it. Last night, I was lying in bed, watching TV, minding my own business. Suddenly, out of nowhere, I got that feeling again. My stomach dropped. It's always that same ominous feeling whenever I'm about to experience something of a paranormal nature. I looked over towards my bedroom door, and lo and behold, it was the same girl that I'd seen a few years before. With my voice trembling, I asked her who she was and what she wanted. She didn't answer. She just smiled again. Only this time, her eyes went white. Completely white. But her mouth grew into that same huge black grin. Only this time, she had tons of teeth. Way too many teeth. This is where a professional medium could figure out the who's, where's, why's and what's. But I'm not that good. I stood up to get my incense, as this seems to drive them out. He turned around and ran down the hall in the direction of my mum's bedroom. What I could see through the crack of my mum's bedroom door was absolutely spine-chilling. This terrifying demon girl was perched on top of my mum, staring at me, much like a predatory animal claiming their prey. It was wild. It was intense, and I've never seen anything so terrifying in all my life, ever. It was in this moment I also realised that this terrifying entity was never attached to my sister's friend. It was attached to my mum, like a parasite, but for how many years? My mum has always exuded an incredibly negative energy, no matter what anybody does to try to help her. She thrives on drama, she's hostile, bitter, and she loves to play the victim. I can only conclude that this entity is drawing its strength from my mum's negativity. I don't feel like she can actually hurt me, but when she's around, it's truly terrifying. She looks and feels absolutely demonic, and I'm sure she thrives from the chaos within our home. My husband and I have had roommates since we moved into our house in order to help make ends meet. At one point, we had a roommate named Patrick. During the time Patrick was living with us, I would often get the feeling of being watched. I started to pay attention to the times that I got this feeling, in order to determine whether there was a pattern, or something that would explain the feelings. After a month or so of writing down the times that I felt these feelings, I still couldn't determine a pattern. So, I decided to make my notes more detailed, such as who was at home, what I was doing, what room I was in, etc. After a month or so, I started to realise that the feelings would only occur when Patrick was in the house. So at first, I started to presume that Patrick was the guilty party. However, knowing him as well as I did, I had a difficult time really believing that this was the case. Aside from that, I know that my husband would have noticed if Patrick had been lurking in on me, as the feelings came whether or not my husband was home. Nevertheless, for a while I paid more attention to Patrick, and even searched the bedroom and bathrooms for signs of video equipment or something. All of this was to no avail, and eventually I just grew to tolerate it. One night, I was in bed, restlessly trying to get some sleep. My husband was already fast asleep in the bed next to me. I was alerted to what I could have sworn was the sound of a child giggling, and it sounded like it was coming from out in the hallway. Our bedroom door slowly started creeping open, and what I can only describe as the silhouette of a child slowly peeked its head around the door. Shocked, I sat up in bed and rubbed my eyes. The child was now gone, but I could definitely hear the pitter-patter of small feet running down the hallway. I was totally creeped out, but I had to investigate. I got out of bed and searched the whole house, not really knowing what to expect. I knew there was no child in our house, and the search turned up nothing. Patrick lived with us for a little over a year. A few days prior to him moving out, Patrick and I were alone in the house, and we had one of our deep conversations. At some point, Patrick told me about the spirit of a little boy that seemed to have followed him around for as long as he can remember. He said when he was younger, he would notice it more frequently, but he still noticed it sometimes to this day. Patrick said that he'd even seen the boy on a few occasions, and some of his friends had seen him too. He doesn't know the boy's name, or why he follows him, but he's never seemed to wish him any ill harm. Instead, he's seemingly gone out of his way to protect Patrick in some dangerous situations. A kind of guardian angel, so to speak. Anyway, when Patrick moved out, the little boy did too, and I've had no feelings of being watched ever since. That's the reason I believe that while Patrick lived with us, the ghost of a little boy roomed with us too. I was reading through this subreddit when I was reminded of a scary experience I had a few years back. I worked in a pub that had earned itself a reputation for being haunted. There are many stories about the place, but this one is personal to me. One night, the landlord and his wife had gone out for drinks with some visiting family and friends. There was a decent-sized group, and they would probably end up back at the pub later for afters. It was a very quiet weeknight, and there was just me working at the bar and one of the regulars finishing his drink as it was approaching closing time. It was a local guy, and we were just having general conversation, chatting at the bar, when we both paused for a moment when we heard something. We listened intently as we both very clearly heard loud voices coming through the back door. Lots of high-spirited talking and laughing, footsteps, high heels on the tiled floor. Naturally, we thought the landlord and his friends had returned from their night out. We got up, and I started getting glasses out ready for their drinks. The customer at the bar remarked something like, "Here we go, they sound well oiled," and we both laughed. We waited for a minute or so, and nobody came into the bar. It fell silent, and we both looked at each other. "What the hell? You heard that, didn't you?" There was nobody there. It was so clear, so real. I just froze. We definitely weren't imagining things. We both heard it, and it was coming from inside the building. Eventually, the customer got me to lock up, and he walked me home. We weren't going to stay there for a minute longer. I ended up running that pub myself a few years later, and I moved into the flat upstairs. I must be mad, because the reputation of that place didn't disappoint. The fatal crash. The following story isn't so much a true story, it's more of a local folklore type story, but I found it interesting nonetheless. Fatal crash is a legend about a fatal car accident that happened on Brubaker Bridge and the paranormal events that followed. According to legend, in the 1930s there was a terrible accident on Brubaker Bridge. 5 cars crashed into each other on the bridge, and all of the people in the crash were killed on impact. Because the cars crashed in such a remote area, nobody saw it happen, and the accident went unnoticed for a whole day. Eventually, after nightfall, a neighbouring farmer was driving his tractor down the road when he discovered the crash. Immediately, he reported it to the police. When the emergency services arrived at the wreck, a total of 12 dead bodies were discovered. All of the victims from the crash were put into the coroner's van and taken to the morgue, where they were all identified and given proper burials. After such a tragic accident, the town was eager to move on and put the fatal crash behind them. However, shortly after the accident, the farmer that originally discovered the crash reported that every time he drove across Brubaker Bridge, his tractor would suddenly lose power for no reason. He said his tractor would come to a complete stop. Then he'd hear 30 loud knocks on the side of his tractor, followed by a gurgling and hissing sound. As time went on, other locals reported similar experiences. They said they'd be driving down the road, then suddenly, as they'd cross Brubaker Bridge, their car would stall and totally lose power. This was always followed by the sound of 13 knocks on the side of their vehicle, followed by that gurgling and hissing sound, right before their car regained power and they went on their way. The farmer began to wonder if the emergency services had recovered all of the bodies from the crash. He searched the area around the bridge and eventually wandered into the woods at the side of the road. What he found there absolutely chilled him to his core. Sitting, propped up against a tree, in the snow, was the body of a man. He was frozen stiff. But the worst part about it was, his arms had been eaten by black bears, leaving only bloody stumps. His mouth was also hanging open, and his tongue was missing. The farmer had found the 13th victim of the fatal crash. The man had been thrown out of the car upon impact and wound up lying injured at the side of the road. It said that he was dragged into the woods by black bears, where his arms were eaten and his tongue was devoured. The ambulance sirens scared the black bears away, and the man was very much still alive when the paramedics were removing the bodies from the cars. He had been trying to call for help, but because he had no arms or tongue, nobody could hear him. Today, locals still believe that the ghost of the 13th victim of the fatal crash still haunts Brubaker Bridge, stopping any cars that dare to cross his path. The ghost beats on the side of the cars with the bloody stumps that were once his arms, trying to call for help. But all that's heard is that hissing and gargling noise, because he doesn't have a tongue. Thanks for listening to the story. I have had my fair share of paranormal encounters in the past. In 2018, I was living in a house with 2 roommates, where paranormal experiences were a regular occurrence. We would quite often hear loud, heavy footsteps walking through the house when nobody else was home. However, the straw that really broke the camel's back was when one night the footsteps were absolutely relentless, walking around the house for hours into the night, and the TV kept turning on and off by itself. Coincidentally, one of my roommates had an uncle who was a paranormal investigator. He called him up to explain what was going on, and his uncle arrived at the house within days. His uncle set up a ghost box to communicate directly with one of the spirits. He blessed the house, and we had no problems from there on out. But that story is nothing compared to what we're dealing with now. When it comes to the paranormal, I fully believe in spirits or interdimensional beings, whatever they might be. With that being said, I always try to rule out every other possible physical explanation I can before I jump to paranormal conclusions. Since me and my wife moved into our apartment, we got engaged, had a baby, and got married. In the very beginning, nothing of note ever really happened. It wasn't until our baby was born that the paranormal occurrences began. It all started in the hospital, where me, my wife, and her sister all had paranormal experiences. I saw shadows in a mirror, which was no big deal. It was late, and I'd hardly had any sleep. Then, the baby heat lamp in the room started getting extremely bright, with no real cause. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was just a machine cycle. The night after our baby was born, I had the most intense dream of my life. It was like a lucid dream, but not like any lucid dream I'd ever had before. This was evil. I was being humiliated and attacked, and every time I began praying to break free from it, I got switched to a new setting before I managed to finish the prayer. It ended when a demon in the hospital attacked me. This demon was mimicking my wife, and it wasn't until I said, "You are not my wife," that the dream ended. I am a Catholic, but one of my sisters is way more religious than I am. By chance, she came by the next day to visit, and I told her all about this dream. She gave me 2 St. Dominic exorcist medals. I have no idea why she carries them, but I'm really glad she does. I held on to one, and my wife held on to the other. That night, in the hospital, we heard something slam really hard on the bathroom floor. I went to investigate, and found an afterbirth care kit lying in the middle of the bathroom floor. I tried not to give any more energy to it, but just out of curiosity, I tried to replicate the sound that I'd heard. The only way I could get close to replicating that sound was if I lifted that care kit up over my head and slammed it on the floor as hard as I possibly could. I distinctly remember telling this entity, or whatever it was, that it was not to follow us home, and it most certainly wasn't welcome. I said that it should stay at the hospital or go back to hell where it belongs. This all happened in December. We came home from the hospital, and in the 3 months from when we had the baby to when we got married in March, there wasn't really much activity at all. However, since the day of our wedding, the activity has been relentless. It hasn't been every single day, but as time goes on, it seems to be escalating, and it seems to be focused primarily around my wife. While I'm at work, she stays home with the baby, where she's exposed to whatever this thing is. It started with small, insignificant things. He says things were going missing and turning up in other places. They'd be knocking on the doors and walls, and things would knock over on their own. For me, the most noticeable thing was our behaviour towards one another. I found myself to be out in the living room most of the time, and my wife was spending more and more time in the bedroom. As time went on, things started to happen more often when I was at home. Large items would get knocked over, but one of the most peculiar things was that the AC would turn itself off. We have one of those older thermostats with a physical switch to turn it off and on, and we often found ourselves asking the other who had turned it off. On more than one occasion, we hadn't even noticed that the air conditioning had been turned off until the temperature in our apartment reached 80 degrees. There was an incident when I was in the bathroom washing my hands. I looked into the mirror and saw my wife walk into the living room from the bedroom. There was absolutely no question whatsoever it was her, except it can't have been her, because it turns out she was in bed, asleep the whole time. Little over a week ago, me and my wife got into a huge argument. I went to stay at my parents' house for a few days until we were able to work things out. For whatever reason, I just couldn't bring myself to go back home. I couldn't explain it. I just had an extreme aversion to going back. I stayed at my parents' house for one more night, and like magic, I was finally ready to go home. All day Sunday, it was fine. It was like a brand new apartment. It was quiet. Maybe too quiet. Then, at around 6 p.m, the activity escalated once more. In the bedroom, and at first only in the bedroom, there was this horrible screeching sound. It was like that high-pitched noise you get when you place a microphone too close to a loudspeaker. My wife called me into the room because she was first to hear it, and the second I walked through that bedroom door, it hit me like a ton of bricks. I could barely make the sound out, but the pressure on my eardrums was oppressive. However, as soon as I walked out the bedroom door, it stopped. I went back in, and out, and in again. I unplugged everything, but nothing would stop that god-awful sound until we left the room. As I searched for more answers, the more it started to impact me. We went out into the living room, but before long, we could hear it emanating from the bedroom. Eventually, my head started pounding. I felt nauseous, and I started to feel like if I stayed for too long, I'd pass out. Finally, it got to the point where the only way we could find relief was if we left the apartment altogether. We packed the absolute minimum and left that night. We decided to get away for a while. It's now been 9 days since we slept in our own bed. My mental health has improved dramatically while I've been at my parents', and my wife says she is already feeling much better too. We decided to book into a hotel for an extra few days, as we both absolutely dread going back home. We are considering breaking our lease, but we don't know if that will fix the problem. We don't know what it is that's there. We don't know if it's something that followed us back from the hospital, or something different entirely. Whatever it is, it's evil, and it doesn't like seeing our family living in harmony. So, this takes place back in 2005. We were serving at the US Embassy in the Ivory Coast, West Africa. One morning, after working my night shift at the embassy, I returned home to the Marine house. The US Marines lived in a local residence bought and paid for by the US Embassy. It was a 3-story home in what locals would consider an upscale neighbourhood by Ivorian standards. The home was fairly large and had a pool, gym, laundry room and driver's room all on the first floor. It housed 5 US Marines that were tasked with protecting the US Embassy and its personnel. On the morning in question, I was very tired. I had just arrived in the country, and was getting used to the night shift work, which was fueled by energy drinks. I walked up to my room, which was on the third story of the house. It was a relatively medium-sized room with a bathroom attached. There was one large window in the bedroom that was fitted with heavy curtains to keep the sunlight out so we could sleep during the day. I was crashing really hard from all the caffeine. I managed to take my uniform off and climb straight into bed. It wasn't long before I reached that state of mind when you're half asleep, half awake. I believe I was at the point where I just started dreaming, when some sort of sixth sense kicked in and told me, you need to open your eyes. I remember waking up, opening my eyes, and staring at the opposite wall at the foot of my bed. The room was dark, and I was still half asleep as I scanned from the left side of the room to the right. I recall my eyes concentrating on the daylight that was creeping from behind the curtain, shooting down the side of the wall to the corners of my room. As my eyes reached the far right corner, I stopped and focused on a dark spot in the corner of the room. I couldn't make out what it was at first, but the light abruptly stopped before hitting the corner of the room. As I stared at this dark spot, I came to the terrifying realization I was looking at the silhouette of a person. It was tall and thin, and I could just make out the outline of the shoulders and head. My first instinct was that maybe I was dreaming, or maybe this was some kind of pareidolia. But after a few seconds my vision cleared up, and the silhouette was still very much there. As I focused harder on this figure, I realised it wasn't disappearing, and the chilling reality hit me that somebody was standing there. I had a quick flash thought of what the fuck is that? I stared intently at what seemed to be the head of this figure when it appeared to open its eyes. The only reason I knew that this dark figure in the shadows had opened its eyes was because its eyes were glowing red like some kind of warning beacon. In that instant, I was hit with an overwhelming feeling of tightness in my throat and chest. I couldn't breathe. I was clutching my throat and gasping for breath. It felt like the body weight of a person was bearing down on my chest. The tightness around my throat very much felt like somebody was choking me with their bare hands. Still, to this day, I remember the grip it had, and the flash of heat I felt run down the back of my neck all the way down to my feet. I started to go lightheaded. I was slowly losing consciousness, and I closed my eyes. My arms went limp as they dropped to my side. I couldn't move. I was paralysed. This dark figure was still staring at me with those sinister red eyes, totally motionless. After about 10 seconds of pure panic, I felt this entity release its grip. I drew in as much oxygen as I possibly could, and after a few seconds I regained consciousness and my senses. The figure was gone. As soon as I had the ability to move, my first instinct was to grab my K-bar knife, which was kept on top of my wardrobe. I climbed to my feet and stumbled across the room, ready to confront this thing in my room, whatever it was. For the next couple of minutes, I tore open my curtains and cleared the bedroom and bathroom, repeating to myself, "What the fuck?" over and over again. My room was completely empty. After the initial adrenaline rush had worn off, I went from attack mode to trying to rationalise with myself about what had just happened. Maybe this was just a side effect of the medication I was on. One of the cons of working an African post is that we were ordered to take mefloquine by our command. Mefloquine is an anti-malaria medication. One of the side effects clearly stated there was a possibility of night terrors. Regardless, I just couldn't stay in that room any longer. I ended up falling asleep in the common area with the TV turned on. Fast forward 5 months, and we moved out of that home into a new embassy compound that had just been constructed. Me and some of the other Marines decided to have a movie night, and we watched The Exorcism of Emily Rose. When the film was finished, I walked into the kitchen and ran into Sammy, our butler. Sammy was in charge of doing our laundry and prepping our meals throughout the week. He was a really amazing guy. When he wasn't working for us at the compound, he worked as a priest at a local Catholic church. With that movie fresh in my mind, I asked Sammy if he could perform an exorcism. Sammy responded, "Of course, sir. I do them quite often. Many evil spirits here in the Ivory Coast." Unsure whether or not to take him seriously, I said, "Are you joking, Sammy?" Sammy said, "No, sir. There's plenty of evil here." I went on to ask him, "When we moved here, did you bless this house?" He said, "Yes, of course, sir. This is a very peaceful home." Then he paused for a second. "Not like the old house. Evil resided in those walls." My blood ran cold, and I asked him to explain and elaborate. Sammy responded, "The old house was inhabited by 3 demonic spirits." He recalled that one morning while he was doing our laundry in the basement of our old house, he looked into the Marine gym and saw 3 shadow figures with glowing red eyes standing side by side. He said he grabbed his crucifix and began to pray before the 3 entities vanished. He then instructed me to go and speak with Joey, one of our Ivorian Marine drivers. So that's exactly what I did. Joey was a 49-year-old father of 8 who had worked for 15 years as a driver for the US Embassy Marines. Joey told me that one night, after dropping off one of the Marines, he returned to the driver's room where he tried to get some sleep. He was awakened by something whispering his name. When he opened his eyes, he said there were 2 glowing red eyes staring straight back at him. Before he knew it, he felt like he was being choked. He said he swung his arms wildly, but didn't seem to be able to connect with whatever it was that was choking him. When it finally released him, he ran out of the driver's room, put into the armoured suburban Marine vehicle, and drove to the US Embassy where he remained for the rest of the night. He never stepped foot in that driver's room ever again. He told me that sometime later our gardener accidentally dug up a juju box in the garden, with bones and voodoo witchcraft trinkets inside. It was his belief that a curse had been placed on the property. As if the story couldn't get any creepier, I headed inside the US Embassy later that day to speak with my gunnery sergeant about some work. Our conversation diverted to what I had just learned about our old house. Gunny had this strange look on his face. He reached up to his logbooks and pulled out an incident reports binder from a few years prior. He pulled out a report filed by a former Marine at the post. He had reported being woken up by an intruder in his room. He was choked almost to the point of unconsciousness. However, as soon as the intruder released their grip, they disappeared into thin air as if they were never there. The Marine was absolutely convinced it had happened, to the point that an official US Embassy report had to be filed. When I asked the gunner where this Marine had been staying, you guessed it, he was staying at our old house, in my room. These events occurred in 2007. My sister and future brother-in-law had just had my nephew and moved into a new rental home. The home itself was very old and was located in a historic part of town. I was asked to babysit for my nephew one evening. My sister and brother-in-law wanted their first evening out since having him, so I duly obliged. I arrived at their home and my sister went over a few details. She mentioned that she had a load of baby clothes in the dryer and asked that if I had time would I take them out and fold them. They left to enjoy their evening, and 30 minutes later the dryer was beeping to let me know that it had finished its cycle. I scooped my nephew up in my arms and placed him in his crib. I went to the laundry room, took the clothes out of the dryer and started folding them. I then placed all the clothes in a basket, took the basket into the nursery and placed the basket on the changing table. Then I took my nephew out of his crib and put him in the bassinet in the living room. I was watching TV quietly for a while. That was until I heard a really loud bang coming from the nursery, the room that I'd left the washing basket in. I peeked into the bassinet and my nephew was still sound asleep, so I made my way over to the nursery to see what the noise was, and quietly opened the door. The laundry basket that I had placed on the changing table was now upside down on the other side of the room, and all of the clothes that I'd folded were thrown all over the place. I quickly picked the basket up along with the clothes and took them in the living room to refold them. I was confused by the whole situation, but I really didn't want to ruin my sister and brother-in-law's evening, so I kept the incident to myself. The rest of the evening went pretty smoothly. A few months went by, and once again my sister asked me to babysit for my nephew. I agreed, and this time my mother was joining my sister and brother-in-law as they were going to a casino. My nephew had been sleeping prior to their departure, and my sister told me that when he wakes up, he'll need feeding. Approximately 30 minutes after they left, my nephew woke up from his sleep. I scooped him up out of his crib, took him into the kitchen, placed him in his high chair. I then began to prepare his bottle of milk. Before I go into what happened next, my name is Angelina, but everyone calls me Angie. The only person that ever calls me Angelina is my mother, and that's when I'm in trouble, or if she's really angry with me. All in all, it's very rare to hear my full name being used. Suddenly, I heard my mother yelling angrily from what sounded like the nursery.
Angelina, come here, now.
I yelled out, "Just a second, I'm in the middle of making the baby's bottle." Then again, I heard my mum call out,
Angelina, come here, now.
only this time, she sounded like she was in the master bedroom. Frustrated and confused, I yelled back, "What's going on? Wait 1 second." I picked up my nephew and started walking towards the master bedroom, talking to what I assumed was my mother. I was asking, "What's going on? Why are you so upset? What's happened?" Then, I walked into an empty room. I looked around, and my mother was nowhere to be seen in that master bedroom. Then, I looked in the nursery, which of course was empty too. I looked through the rest of the home, guest bedroom, bathroom and garage. My mother wasn't in the house. I even checked the driveway to see if there was any other cars on the drive, but the only car on the drive was mine. I came back inside the house and called my mum on the phone. I said, "Hi, did you guys forget something and come back?" My mum answered, sounding very confused. She said, "No, why?" To which I responded, "I just heard you in the house not long ago. You sounded really upset." She responded, "I really don't know what you're talking about. We've been on the road for over 30 minutes now." My stomach immediately sank. Again, I didn't want to ruin their evening, so I just said that maybe it was the television, even though I knew that the TV had been off all night. Immediately after I hung up the phone, the doorbell rang. My heart nearly jumped out of my chest, and I walked to the front door. I almost opened the door without checking, thinking that maybe my mum was pulling a prank, and she was going to be at the front door. There was absolutely nobody outside. I opened the door to peek outside to see if there was any other cars on the drive, but again, my car was the only car out there. I was overwhelmed with a sense of dread. There was absolutely nobody outside, and from where that house was situated, you could clearly see down the street in both directions. I never mentioned any of these incidents to my sister until she moved out of that rental house. As I was helping her move, I noticed that she'd moved my nephew's crib into the master bedroom. I asked her why she'd moved his crib into her bedroom, thinking maybe he'd been having sleep issues or something. What she told me was completely unexpected. She said around Halloween she bought a black light and plugged it in the nursery. The room instantly lit up with what she described as a huge concentrated stain in the middle of the room and handprints up the walls. Understandably, this made her feel very uncomfortable and quite concerned. She moved his crib into her bedroom that night. I told her what had happened on the 2 occasions that I'd babysat for my nephew. She started to open up that strange things had been happening in that house, and this was the main reason for them moving. She was experiencing lights flickering in the home. The doorbell would ring and there'd be no one there, and she started to hear disembodied voices at night. She said the landlord had offered to lower the rent if they signed a year's lease. Apparently, the landlord had been having problems getting anyone to stay in that house, and she was the tenant that had been there the longest. She politely declined the offer and moved out soon after. I always wondered what had happened in that home and wished that I'd investigated the history further. It really sends chills down my spine to think that whatever was in that house was mimicking my mother's voice. Have you ever experienced anything like this?